Episode 131 of the Read to Lead podcast is brought to you by FreshBooks, offering a month of unrestricted use, completely free, and you don't need a credit card for this trial. To claim your free month, go to freshbooks.com/read to lead right now and enter Read to Lead in the How Did You Hear About Us section.
Let's say you're a micromanager, you're interacting with somebody, and you're thinking for them and getting in their space. You're actually writing code on that program of how they're going to work. They're going to work in a dependent and confused way.
Welcome to the Read to Lead podcast with Jeff Brown. Jeff believes that if you desire to achieve true success in business and in life, then consistent and intentional reading is a must. The Read to Lead podcast will not only help you narrow this ever-important reading list, but also bring you key insights and valuable feedback from some of today's most successful and inspiring authors. And now, here's Jeff.
Hi there, and welcome to the podcast that has been nominated Best Business Podcast no less than 3 times, and the podcast dedicated to your personal and professional growth. Maybe this year we'll get a win. Who knows? The topic of leadership, of course, is at the center of what we discuss each and every week. And we also will dig into topics like productivity, career, personal development, marketing, business, sales, entrepreneurship, and more. In a moment, you and I are going to be joined by New York Times best-selling author Dr. Henry Cloud. He's the author of over 30 books, and his latest is The Power of the Other, the startling effect other people have on you, from the boardroom to the bedroom and beyond, and what to do about it. I plan to ask Dr. Cloud about the 4 kinds of connectedness and the one in which you can truly thrive, advice for you if you're struggling with whether to continue a work or personal relationship that is draining your energy, and what we need to understand about freedom, control, and responsibility, and a lot more. If you're anything like me when it comes to business, you're not a big fan of the whole finance and accounting part of the process. I mean, it's nice to make money. That's, of course, the fun part, but keeping track of it all and invoicing and all that can sometimes be a pain. At least that was the case for me about 7 years ago, until I started using FreshBooks cloud accounting software, and I've never looked back. I continue to use it. I've recommended it to friends and clients, and for the last several weeks right here on this podcast, I've been recommending it to you. I hope you'll check it out if you haven't already. FreshBooks, I love it because, for many reasons, but one is because it's super intuitive, and it makes things like creating and sending my invoices extremely easy. And that's really the most important thing. Getting started on FreshBooks is extremely simple, and I'd say it's simple even if you're not a numbers person, and especially if you're not a numbers person. I hope you'll give it a try. It's absolutely free to do so for 30 days. You can try all their features during that time just by going to freshbooks.com/read to lead. That's freshbooks.com/read to lead. And then be sure to enter Read to Lead in the How Did You Hear About Us section. Our guest today, Dr. Henry Cloud, is a clinical psychologist with an extensive background in both the clinical and leadership consulting worlds. I mentioned he's a New York Times best-selling author. He works with CEOs and their executive teams in Fortune 500 companies and family-held private businesses. He's an international speaker, written more than 30 books, including the one we're talking about today. It again is called The Power of the Other, the startling effect other people have on you, from the boardroom to the bedroom and beyond, and what to do about it. Dr. Cloud, welcome to the Read to Lead podcast.
It's good to be with you. I love the title of your podcast, by the way.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. It's inspired by someone I think you know, Michael Hyatt.
I do know Michael.
He was the first person, though I don't know if the quote is unique to him. He is the first person who I ever heard say, "Leaders read and readers lead." And that just really stuck with me. And so the title of the podcast sort of was inspired by that quote.
You know, it's interesting, not that this is our topic this morning, but I, most of my work is with CEOs and their teams and working on their cultures. And it's really interesting whenever I talk to people about how they're going to help somebody get from one place to another, in an arc of growth or change or getting better. There's always 4 categories. And the first one is information that, we can't change. Our brains can't go from here to there if we don't have some kind of new knowledge or some kind of new principles. And it's such a big component of it. So I love it.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that very much. I certainly don't feel like I would be where I am today without many of the books that I've read. Speaking of which, chapter 1 of Dr. Cloud's book introduces us to the idea of this thing called neglected truth. And I'm wondering if you can help us, Dr. Cloud, understand leadership and personal growth from your perspective. There is a shift away, isn't there, from a focus on the individual, which we as a society seem to put a lot of focus on.
Well, it's kind of both. When I wrote that, I was actually talking not only about, groups themselves or teams, but in the individual space, when a person themselves wants to grow, a lot of times they think about doing that individually. In other words, I'm going to read, I'm going to study, I'm going to try harder, I'm going to develop my skills and my competencies. And a lot of times, even in leadership development, we send people to events, which is very important, and seminars and et cetera, and we emphasize these skills and competencies. You got to engage talent, you got to execute strategy, and you got to be a change agent and build critical mass. And we help them figure out how to do all this stuff. But, and here's the neglected truth, the reality of how a person gets better in any of those areas requires relationship, period. I mean, that's just a scientific fact. And we know more about this probably in any other area of research, that human performance takes the factor of human relationship into it in order to get better. It's just from a Navy SEAL to an Olympian to a CEO to a mom or dad to a husband or wife. We must have relationship to improve.
Well, talk a bit, if you would, Dr. Cloud, about what you and Professor, I think it's pronounced Daniel Siegel, you call the triangle of well-being. I think he originated this, and then you've sort of picked up on this the sort of working together of the physical, relational, and mental. Can you go into a little bit more detail about that?
Yeah, it's a really important concept. It's actually his term. Siegel is what would he call himself? He's an MD neuropsychiatrist, neuroscientist. Anyway, he plays in that whole field all the time. That's all he does. And what we're talking about here is why is it that something invisible, something immaterial, something non-physical, like a human relationship, why is it that immaterial human bond can affect the material physical world like the brain? And for example, you take a baby, you feed them and water them, and that's all you do. Like sometimes they see this in institutions where kids' physical needs are taken care of, but they're not connected with or bonded with or loved. The physical brain does not grow. The circuitry does not get laid down like a motherboard in a computer. And what happens is, in the absence of relationship, their brain size is smaller, their physical weight is smaller, their immune system is not as good. And this invisible thing called relationship actually affects the development of all aspects of being human, especially the brain. Now, you go on the other end of the spectrum, it's not just babies. You go on the other end of the spectrum, you see gerontology patients who have a heart attack or stroke, and one group has a support group around that illness and the other one doesn't, and both of them have their medical needs taken care of. The ones without human connection have a second heart attack and stroke way more than the other ones. And this just holds true in everything from athletic performance to financial performance across the board. The research is so robust on this that it's our relationships that actually cause the higher functioning in so many ways. And so Siegel's triangle is basically this, that you've got, if a CEO is going to build a business or an entrepreneur is going to start a business and build a business, if you're going to sell a customer, whatever you're going to do in this space, that requires competency, right? And that comes from your brain. And your brain has hardware. It's got circuitry. It's got wiring. It has synapses and dendrites and all of this stuff that we can see under a microscope. It has neurotransmitters like dopamine and serotonin that drive all this goal-oriented behavior and stuff. But you're not just physical. You also have the software. And the software is your mind and how you think. And we work a lot on thinking paradigms and people being able to regulate their emotions and have discipline and all this stuff where you can't put that under a microscope, but we know it affects the brain. You have a positive thought, you get one chemical in your brain. You have a negative thought, you get a different chemical in your brain. On the other hand, your brain chemistry is off, your thoughts are going to be goofy. So those two corners of the triangle affect each other. But the third piece of the triangle is relationship. And we know that the people that you're connected to and the nature of those connections, which is what this book is about, the ingredients that are in those connections affect your brain and they affect your mind. And so everything about performance centers in on relationship.
Well, regarding relationships, Dr. Cloud, let's dig into the 4 different kinds of relationships, or connectedness, I guess is the term in the book. Only one of them is going to help us thrive. Can you walk us through the other 3 first and some of the things that we need to watch out for?
Yeah, and unfortunately, it's going to be an easy walk through memory for all of us because we've all experienced these 3. But I want to set it up a little bit with an analogy I use. You know, when you're on an airplane and you land on the runway, what's the very first thing you do?
You turn your phone on.
That's exactly right. If you're male, you probably turned it on at 500 feet. So here's the deal: you turn your phone on, and up in the left-hand corner, you see this thing that says searching, and it's searching for a connection. Now, what's fascinating about that is every time you turn it on, that's what's going to happen because there's a chip inside of it that is designed to search for a connection. Well, humans are just like that. When a baby comes into the world, the baby does not turn around to mom and say, hey, was that hard on you? Can I help clean up around here? You know, that's not what you got to download all that software from the network, right? They come in and they're just searching for a connection. Like, wah, wah, wah. You know, they're looking for that connection to the network that is going to download all of that stuff that's going to make them grow into performers. Now, we're just like that throughout life. And so here's the deal. Every day, you and I, we are searching for connection, whether we acknowledge it or not, whether we know it or not, but we're looking for a relational connection to navigate life with. And whether that's in a team or your boss or your customer, this connection thing drives everything. So what are the 4 possibilities? Well, I usually draw a map and I say to leaders, okay, and to teams, here's the map of your relational universe. There's 4 corners in this universe that you can be in, one at a time. And the first corner, 4 possibilities. The first one is something we call no connection. You can be in the land of no connection. And that's where you have people around you, but you're not connecting. You're disconnected. And that everybody might have smiles on or everybody might not. But, you know, you feel like you're by yourself. You feel nobody's understanding. We're not connecting. We're not meeting each other's needs. We're just kind of in the same room together. It's one of the loneliest places actually you can be, especially, you know, you hear people talk about marriages, for example, where they're in a marriage and they're alone, or they're in a family and they're alone, or they're on a team, an executive team, or in a company and they feel alone because it's not a place where people get real and vulnerable, and it's not a place where their needs are met. And so that begins to lose meaning. People leave companies for that. People don't perform in that space, and it's a depressing space. So we don't like that forever, right? So then we're going to venture over into corner number 2. And corner number 2 is a bad connection. And what I mean by bad is not necessarily abusive or mean, or though it could be, but a bad connection is a connection that leaves you feeling bad about yourself. So it's that boss you can't ever please, or it's that investor nothing you do can be good enough, or it might be a team member or a business partner or whoever it is or whatever it is. There's something in that relationship where you always go away feeling inferior or not good enough, or I can't ever really make it to the water level. You know, I'm always kind of playing defense in this thing, trying to get good enough. And so that, you know, that's not high performance either. And that affects the brain in very specific ways. So that's corner 2. Well, we don't want to feel that forever either. So we're going to, you know, finally we say, I want to feel good. So we go down to corner 3. And corner 3 is the feel good corner, but it's a it's a fake good. It's a pseudo good. And what I mean by that is we do something to self-medicate. We'll connect with somebody that just, strokes our ego, right? Or just tells us we're great, or flatters us, or maybe an illicit relationship, or somebody that, just blows smoke all the time. Or we might even do it with a substance, to go towards an addiction or something, just to medicate and feel good about oneself. Some people go to the internet and find stuff on there to make them feel good, but it's some attempt to connect with something or someone that makes you feel good. You see a lot of leaders do this sometimes when they're not facing problems in their, in their business. All they want to hear is a good number, right? They tell me that what are the next sales numbers? What are they? And they're kind of addicted to this, give me good news. So those are the three that obviously you don't want to spend much time in any of those.
And that fourth corner is where the real connections are made, right? How can we be sure if a connection's real?
Well, corner 4 is the one. It's exactly what I call it. It's a real connection, and what that means is there's a place where you're being real, and it's a place where the people with you are being real. Now, one of the things I mean by that, and the rest of the book actually talks about, there are a handful of components we know from research that have to exist in this real relationship, specifically as it relates to performance. But the first one is that we're talking about real. So what that means is, in the beginning is it's somewhere where your strengths can live. Some relationships, people aren't really free to show their strengths. It's going to threaten somebody. They might threaten another person on the team, or their business partner, or they feel embarrassed that they think they're good at something. They want to try something. Sometimes it's strength, but sometimes it's weaknesses. Sometimes it's like, I don't know what I'm doing here. I'm confused. I need some clarity. Or I tried this and that's all I got, and I need some input to, go down another path. And I know you guys are expecting this, and I don't want to let you down. But whether it's good or bad, we can come to the table with what's real. And part of that is we have to, and this is the teams and the performers that really, really soar. It's when you can exist in relationship with what I call your need states. In other words, when you're in a state of need and you can go to a relationship and you can leave that relationship or that meeting in a different state, then that's a real connection. In other words, I'm confused. I don't know what to do with this customer. I don't know what to do with this deal. It's falling apart. I got 3 or 4 things I'm thinking about, but I go into a meeting with my executive team or my team or my business partners, and I go in there and say, guys, I'm upside down this thing. Here's what I think. Here's what the customer did. Here's what the investor did, and et cetera, et cetera. And I need some help. When that's okay to do and it's welcomed and everybody jumps into that, and you leave that meeting no longer with a lack of clarity, but you leave that meeting in a different state, like you've got some direction, you've got some hope, you got some energy, you got some belief we can figure this thing out. Your brain has physically changed. The different chemicals in your neurotransmitters are driving different behavior and functioning and ability to perform than before you went in there. And that's corner 4.
Well, what advice, Dr. Cloud, would you give to someone who is struggling with maybe whether or not to continue a relationship with someone who is maybe draining their energy in some way? I mean, the world being what it is, we can't necessarily spend 100%, or nor should we spend 100% of our time around strictly those real connections. There are sometimes where we have to step out of that, right?
Well, let's put it this way. There's always a time where you're going to be talking to somebody in one of the other 3 corners. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to be there.
Right.
See, we can, and I'm not trying to paint these either as fixed, discrete kinds of, characters, even though they kind of can be in the extremes. But these are more states, right? So think about it this way. I walk into a meeting, and let's say it's my team. And let's say we all kind of, we know this at some level, that there's something going on that we're not really talking about the real issue. We're talking about these numbers and these plans and this, that, and the other. But you can kind of feel the deadness in the room. You can kind of feel the disconnection. If you find yourself there, one of the things you can do is just name it. And you can say, I don't know if we're really talking about what we need to talk about. Or it seems like sometimes it's hard in here for us to talk about things that make people uncomfortable. You know, and sometimes what you can do is you can just name it. You know, people do this in marriage all the time. I feel disconnected from you. Where are you? You know, even on different schedules. It's a light version, or you've been withdrawing is the heavy version, right? But you name it. And in naming that, don't do it in a corner to accusing way. Do it in a corner for vulnerable way. Say, you know what? I really need you guys. And we need to work together here. And I'm feeling like, you know, I need us to talk at a different level and get into some stuff. But I feel a little uncomfortable even saying that, right? So that's threatening. But the threat is, I want you to jump into the cold water with me. It's not, I'm going to push you in the water. And those are very different. I think you can really do that in all the corners. And you know, ultimately, to your point, not everybody's going to come with you. I just did the Entre Leadership event with Dave Ramsey's group, and Dave and President Bush and Pat Lencioni and Seth Godin, and it's a great event. And that evening, we had a kind of a meet and greet and mill around cocktail hour, kind of 2 or 3 hours with a lot of the attendees, which was really, really great because we got to hang out and talk about their companies, right, and what they do. And I had this guy walk up to me, and he literally is so cool, so meaningful, and he, you know, kind of misty-eyed. And he said, you know, I got to tell you what's happened. He said, I took your book and I went back to my team. He said, we were really struggling and things had been flat and going downhill, and it had been bad for a few years. And I said, okay, guys, here's the deal. We're not going to operate like this anymore. We're going to establish these specific practices around here, and here's how we're going to relate to each other. And he said, I'm just not going to allow the other stuff anymore. And he said he went in there, and now the book that he took in there was Boundaries for Leaders, and it talks about being a steward over the kind of thinking that's happening in a team. And he went and he just said, okay, no more victim thinking, no more blaming, no more excusing. And he put strong boundaries around that. And he said, we're going to operate in a different way. He said the team applauded. And then he said they went to work, and he said the last 2 years they've had 30% growth each year.
Wow.
And he said it all came from the behaviors. And so here's the kicker to your question. He said, but not everybody wanted to play that way. We lost a couple of people, and he said, I'm really glad we did. So to your question, what you can do is you can invite them, you can cajole them, you can model for them, you can ask them, you can beg them. But ultimately, Corner 4 is a place where people want to be voluntarily. There aren't any slaves or inmates. So if they don't want to come, then, you know, say, well, you can go be critical somewhere else, but that's not something we're going to do here.
Would you be willing to speak more into the different kinds of brands and flavors of energy that we need to tap into?
Well, tell me what you mean by brand.
When I read the section in the book on different strokes, you talk about that just as there are positive and negative sources of energy, there are also different brands and flavors of energy we need to fuel professional and personal growth.
We absolutely do need to fuel it. And let's start with this. Okay, so all connection, basically, if you go back to Siegel's work and you look at what the physicists do and you look at what the neuroscientists do in the brain, basically what we're talking about here is two things. We're talking about energy and we're talking about information. Now, by information, I don't mean just knowledge. What we're talking about is the same thing. You look at a computer, and it's got energy and it has information. The information are the ones and zeros that are the coding of how the program runs. That's the information we're talking about. So in a relationship, what you're going to see is you're going to see an infusion of energy in every relationship that's either positive or negative energy. And if it's positive energy, it takes performance to a higher level. If it's negative energy, it reduces performance. And so that is going to happen. You know this when you go into a meeting and everything's really like, you got 3 or 4 people there and you guys are working on it and you're getting there and stuff is happening And then Joey walks in, and you can feel everything just changed. The energy changed. I mean, you can even smell it sometimes. It's just Joey brings a bad energy. And we can feel it, and everybody's immediately they start saying different sentences. I mean, there's something driving that, right? So there's energy, and this is when, a football team can be losing in the first half and go into the locker room at halftime, and they have a deep come to Jesus halftime meeting, right? And they go back out there and they just kill the other team because some kind of energy happened in that meeting or in that conversation. So energy is number one. Number two is the intelligence. The ordering of the energy is a different way to say it. When you're interacting with somebody, you're actually writing code of how to function. For example, let's say you're a micromanager, you're interacting with somebody, and you're thinking for them and getting in their space and doing all that, then you're actually writing code on that program of how they're going to work. They're going to work in a dependent and confused way. But if you're separate and you give them freedom, you're writing code of how they're going to work too. And so we train people through this infusion of energy and writing code in every interaction. And so the different brands, as you mentioned, there is fueling that we do. There's a lot of different ways we do this, but one of them is basic, just empathizing and connecting and asking questions that actually causes somebody's brain to wake up. When we're giving advice, the human brain on the listener side, when you're giving somebody advice, their brain is basically asleep. If you hook it up to wires, there's not much going on there. There's not. I mean, it's just true. Sort of explains teenagers, right?
Yeah, very much so.
But if you're engaging them and making them co-creators of a solution and curators of all the knowledge and everything that's going to go into that, then you hook their brain up to that, and it is humming. That thing is growing new circuitry that's going to follow through on all that behavior. And so it's fueling. And then the other one right after that is we want to fuel people, but again, we want to give them freedom and self-control. And one of the biggest mistakes that anybody ever makes in leadership is they don't give people freedom to become all that they can be and to do the job they gave them to do. If you don't have somebody that's better than you at doing that position, get rid of them and find somebody that is, or you don't need the position because you're the best, right?
Right.
So this controlling thing is a huge, huge deal. And that goes with setting somebody free, and also the ways that we hold people responsible and accountable affect the brands of these connections as well. So there's a lot of different factors in it. There's got to be the right kind of challenge and the right kind of push that's big enough but not too big.
I wonder if you would tell me, Dr. Cloud, what your dad taught you about freedom and responsibility.
Oh, gosh. It's a funny story, but I use it in the book as an example of when you lead people, you got to set them free. You got to give them freedom to soar, but that's got to be real, and that there's got to be consequences that they've got to feel and handle and be responsible for. Otherwise, the freedom doesn't do them any good. You rescue them from everything, come in there, fix everything and all that. And I told the story about when I was in college. My college girlfriend, I fell in love with this girl, and she was great and wonderful, but nobody told me she was the governor's daughter. And so this is in Texas, and the governor of Texas is kind of a big deal when you're 19 years old and little redneck kid from Mississippi. And so I was going, oh my gosh, I got to meet the governor. He's my girlfriend's father. And freaking out. And so they invited me to come spend a week with them at their ranch, and I was going to meet the parents. And so I drive over from Mississippi and to Austin to pick her up. We took her car, and I said, I'll drive. And so we hop in, we pull out, and I do an illegal U-turn, and I get hit by a dump truck head on.
Oh, no.
Yeah. And totaled the car, her car. Her car on the way to meet her parents.
Oh, wow.
I'm sitting here, there's, fire trucks and police trucks and all this out, and I get this big mess. The car's burning up over there. It's not going to be any good, and I've totaled it. And I'm thinking, what am I going to do? It's not my car. Is it my insurance? Do I call our guide? Is it hers? And then, wait a minute, it's not even her car. It's her father. Oh, no. So I'm just freaking out. So I call my dad back in Mississippi, and I say, Dad, I just had a wreck. He said, are you okay? And I said, yeah. He said, is she okay? And I said, yeah, but the car is totaled. I totaled the car. And he goes, you totaled your car? I said, no, I totaled her car. And he goes, you totaled her? I said, yeah. He said, wait a minute, you going to meet her? He said, what? You got to go meet the governor and tell him you just totaled his car on the first words out of your mouth? And I said, yeah. He said, and this is your girlfriend's father? And I said, yeah. Who do I call? What do I do? There's silence on the phone for a second. And he says, son, if you're old enough to get yourself in a mess like this, you're old enough to get yourself out. He said, but call me and tell me how you did it. He hung up the phone. He just, go figure it out. And, so many times leaders, they're uncomfortable with letting somebody go grapple with it. Mm. And so they never develop their people. You never would have gotten to their best thinking if Dad had gotten the car and driven over to Austin and solved the insurance problem. Mm. Because then I'd have to have another wreck to find out how to do it. Why waste that one?
Exactly. Well, I have a couple of questions, Dr. Cloud, in the few minutes we have left that aren't directly related to the book, if I may. I'm wondering if you can name for us some of your favorite books that you've read that have had an impact on you. Maybe they're the one or two that you go back to again and again.
Gosh, there's just so many, and it changes. It changes in the seasons as well. This is going to sound weird, but he was so ahead of his time. I love to go back and read Peter Drucker. Mm-hmm. The clarity of thought, his classic book, Management, I guess, before we called it leadership.
Right.
And just the clarity and the constructs that he talked about over and over and over was, just really, really important. Now, if you want me to be honest about this, because I could say books people have heard of, but the one that really changed the course of how I think about everything, and nobody's ever even going to find it, but it was a book called Ego Psychology 1 by Blanc and Blanc. And it was a book that came out when I was in graduate school. And what it did was it basically talked about our makeup, the way we're glued together, as the regulatory functions of all performance. And it divided them into all these things like goal orientation and perseverance and emotional regulation and wisdom and judgment and the ability to be aggressive and finish goals and all of that stuff. It brought that into the real world of how it works in human interactions, which is where business actually takes place. Mm-hmm. And so there's one you've never heard of, but it's a book that changed my life. And then on the personal kind of, spiritual side, a book called Love and Will by Rollo May had a big impact on me back from the 70s. And then another book called No Man is an Island by Thomas Merton. You remember a book called The Spirit of Enterprise?
I do.
George Gilder.
Yeah.
I mean, I could go on and on, but right now I find myself reading a lot of neuroscience, because what we're learning about what makes people perform is just incredible.
Well, I love, too, that you've given us some recommendations that are firsts. 131 episodes in, there are a couple of books there you mentioned that have never been mentioned before, so thank you for that.
Good luck on finding them.
Well, I've had a chance to hear Dr. Cloud and see Dr. Cloud speak at a couple of different conferences. One of those was I think at the time it was called the Willow Creek Leadership Summit. I think it's called the Global Leadership Summit now.
In fact, I'll be there this year.
Awesome. I had a chance to attend that via satellite 7 or 8 years in a row, thanks to a great leader that I once worked with and for, and just got so much out of that and so much out of your talk, and just remember being truly impacted by it and just how powerful it was. And not only that, it was funny and witty. And I'd just be curious to know, Dr. Cloud, maybe what some of your tips are for delivering an impactful and memorable public talk.
Oh, gosh. Now you're talking to a surgeon and ask him how to play soccer.
It just comes naturally to you, I guess.
Well, no, it doesn't. Not at all. I am not a speaker, right? So I'm a practitioner. I spend 90% of my time with CEOs and or their teams. But in the course of that, and this is to answer your question, in the course of that, you're going to learn some stuff, right?
Right.
And so I think, at least for me, but I think this is true of other people who speak as well. I think everybody's got a talk somewhere within them. Everybody's got a book or two within them. Mm. You've been living it. You've been writing it. You've seen it. Right. You know how it works. And to me, the best communication occurs when we can just talk to people from the reality and the depths of our experience and who we are and what we really believe and what matters to us. And I think if you stay there and then organize it in terms of, remember the old preacher advice, tell them what you're going to tell them and then tell them and then tell them what you told them. Mm-hmm. And I like to say, what we're going to look at today is, and I like to start with the question is, why is it that some leaders get great results and others don't? And I like to set it up with, here's why we're here and here's where we are in the beginning and we're going to get to the end and we're going to be in a different place. But story is so important. You give people concepts and they're evaluating it. Oh, is that true or not? But you tell them a story that really happened, that illustrates it, it goes to a different part of us and we can identify with somebody in that story. And I think that's always an important part. Just be real. Just share your experience. Don't try to perform. Don't worry about whether anybody likes it or not. Just talk to them. And have fun, by the way. What's worse than listening to a speaker is not having any fun.
Well, I certainly got the sense that you were having fun the times that I've had a chance to hear you speak. And since starting the show several years ago, one of my goals was to have you on someday. So I can scratch that off the bucket list. I really appreciate your time and the writing that you're doing. It's been so impactful and powerful to me. And thank you so much for coming on the show. It was a real treat for me, and I know for everybody else.
Well, thanks, Jeff. I appreciate your support of the book. It's one that truly came from the depths of my heart. I love what this book's about. The Power of the Other is the power that other people have in our lives, for good or bad. And we got to acknowledge that, and we got to align with it well.
Other people do indeed exert power over our lives. To what degree and in what way is up to us. I've included a link, of course, to Dr. Cloud's book in the show notes if you'd like to order it and check out those other links and resources that Dr. Cloud mentioned. We're doing our best as we speak to find those books that he mentioned, despite the fact that it will be difficult. You can go to readtoleadpodcast.com/131 for episode 131. I want to say a quick thanks to a couple of folks who have recently rated and reviewed Read to Lead. One in Stitcher from Harpoon, who gives it 5 stars and calls it an excellent podcast. Thank you. And Corey at Fort Bragg says it's an essential resource for leaders, giving it 5 stars. Corey is an Army chaplain with very limited time, he says, but believes very strongly that leaders must be readers. I couldn't agree more. I encourage you to check out our sponsor, the FreshBooks Cloud accounting software. You can check out all their features free for 30 days and no credit card needed for the trial. Just go to freshbooks.com/read-to-lead and enter Read to Lead in the How Did You Hear About Us section. I had a great time chatting with you. Thanks for participating in today's conversation. Means a lot. I look forward to seeing you next time for the Read to Lead podcast.
Thanks so much for listening to the Read to Lead podcast. As a subscriber, we challenge you to be more than just a passive listener. Become a vital member of the community. Visit us on the web at readtoleadpodcast.com. Until next time, remember, leaders read and readers lead.